Hello, and welcome to the ARC Alliance, Building Bridges in the Community. Our program deals with issues that affect people with disabilities such as autism, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and intellectual and developmental disabilities. The ARC Alliance was founded by families of children with disabilities in 1951, and we've remained a family-driven organization since then. The ARC Alliance believes in full inclusion, that people with disabilities should lead lives similar to those without disabilities and be able to participate, play, and work in the communities in which they live. Today, our program welcomes Paul Stengle, the CEO of the ARC Alliance. And Paul is here today to talk to us about the Pennsylvania state budget. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome, Jolie. Good to be here.
So today you're going to tell us about how the Pennsylvania state budget works and also how we can influence how that budget gets set up. Our first question would be, how would you describe how the Pennsylvania state budget is developed?
At any given time, the administration and the legislation is working on the budget. It really starts once the budget is approved in June. In July, the different divisions will make recommendations to their secretary in September. So they begin to formulate their recommendations in July and August. So if you want increased funding for the waiting list, it's a good time to contact the Office of Developmental Programs in July. If you want to affect OVR, a good time to write the OVR deputy secretary would be in July and August. Once the secretaries get it, they get it in September, and they put together their recommendations through October and November, and secretary cabinet level positions submitted to the governor's budget office in late November, early December. And then the governor budget office puts the budget together. They're going to be recommending to the legislature. It goes to print in January. And then on the first Tuesday on non-election years for the governor, it goes to the legislature for their approval. Once the legislatures get it, it goes into appropriation hearings. So they'll have a hearing on education, they'll have a hearing on labor and industry. And then after the hearings are done, they will vote on it, and before July 1st by law. Sometimes they don't, but the state closes down if they don't. So the budget for the next year, which starts July 1st, has to be approved hopefully by June 30th.
So the budget that the state is looking at on the first Tuesday in February is actually influenced by what people are asking for in June and July of the previous year?
Correct. Yeah. If you want to have an effect on the budget, we start in July talking to the deputy secretaries. So we're talking with OCDEL, the Office of Early Learning and Child Development. We're talking with OVR. We're talking with Special Education Deputy Secretary, and we get the process started. Now, you don't have to know who all those people are. You can just write the governor, because when the governor gets it, he'll send it to the secretary, who will send it to the deputy secretary. But if they don't think anybody cares, the deputy secretaries, it's likely that they're not going to be making the recommendations to the secretary. And at any point, it's harder to get things added if it's not in already. So once the deputies make their recommendations to the secretaries, it gets increasingly harder. And once the secretaries make the recommendation to the governor, it gets increasingly harder to get things added. And usually, particularly for disability issues, the legislatures usually approve what the governor recommended. Rarely do they provide more funding than the governor recommended. So it's really important to get to administration early, so hopefully we can get it in. Once the governor puts it in, it's much easier to get the legislatures to approve it. And again, with disability, usually the legislatures does not argue with the governor about his funding request.
Okay, so if a parent of a child with disabilities wants to see increased funding for programs for persons with disabilities, what steps should they take?
It's not one letter, it's not one visit, but I would start emailing or writing the governor in July. And I would probably write him again in September because it's important that he hears and his administrative staff hear that this is important. And frankly, we have not been very successful over the last few years of getting the kind of letter writing that we would like to get. When the waiting list was much larger than it was today, a lot of people wrote letters, but now that there are more people in services, there seems to be a little more apathy in notifying the governor and the legislatures on the request. You can write the letter anytime. But again, the governor's budget request is done now. And by writing him, he's not going to go, well, I'm going to add something for July 1st next year. It would probably not happen. So what you should be doing now is when February, first Tuesday in February comes, then you have to concentrate on the legislature. And then it's important to write, call, meet with, and ask for those requests and funding.
Okay. And what happens if the House of Representatives passes a budget, but the Senate passes a different budget?
Goes into a joint committee of the Senate and the legislators, and they work to come up to an agreement that is good, that both parties can support so they can get the votes needed to pass it. And again, in this committee is the appropriations chairs, the minority appropriation chairs of both the Senate and the House, and other leadership. But usually in that committee meeting, that joint meeting, is where the final decisions get made. And again, once it comes out of that committee, it is expected there will be no more changes and it will pass. And generally, that's what happens.
Okay. Pennsylvania is experiencing some funding issues. Obviously, there's a lack of revenue and an increase in spending related to COVID-19. Is it at all likely that the state is going to approve any additional funding for the disabilities programs?
I have never gone to a legislator and asked for funding where they said, oh, we got lots of money, this isn't a problem. What they say to you is, what do you want us to cut? And we don't have any money and we have a major problem. I guarantee you there will be some increases. I think it's going to be much more difficult this year because clearly the state is in a very difficult situation. Of course, that could change if the federal government gave relief. I'm not optimistic that there will be a lot of funding made available for our interest. I think there might be some money put in for the waiting list. There are very few, I can't remember a year over the last 20, 30 years where we did not get an increase in the waiting list. The state made some commitments too, and I think they'll try to honor those commitments. One of the commitments was that individuals graduating from school would get support for day programming and or employment. So I think they're going to have a difficulty walking away from the commitments they made. But we're looking at things with the legislators, and this is not a budget issue, that aren't funding focused, that won't cost a lot of funds to implement. For example, burden of proof. And basically burden of proof would put the responsibility on the school district if a parent asked for a hearing because they felt their child was not being educated appropriately. So we will be pushing budgets and we will be pushing funding. We don't know what it's going to look like come July when they vote on the budget. We don't know what President-elect Biden will be able to get as far as relief to the states. But we're more hopeful that we may be able to get some things passed that don't have the big dollars attached to it.
Okay. So if I get an audience with my local state legislator, what do you think it's important for me to communicate to that person if I'm asking for increased funding for persons with disabilities?
If you're a millionaire, give him a large donation and tell him what you want, and you'll have some effect on him, I'm confident. If you're not a millionaire, we have to sell our funding request by the legitimacy of our need, and I think the desire of Americans to help people who are in need. So I would be prepared to tell your story of having a child with disability, if you have one, and the hardships and what you expect for support. We have a lot of influence, but it's not because of our donations or our PACs or all that stuff that the drug companies and the business community have. What we have to tell is our story. And I have found most people become legislators because they care about their constituents. They want to do good. And if they can understand a very complicated system, generally legislators have responded very well to our request. But again, they need to hear the stories. They need to know that the programs we're requesting funding for are having a positive effect and helping families in real ways. So I would go in and say, I want increased funding for X, Y, and Z, and I would tell the story related to what those funds do and what they mean to you as an individual citizen and taxpayer.
Okay, when I'm approaching a state legislator, obviously I'm competing with professional lobbyists and, like you said, donors who have more to contribute than I do. Do you think that the first contact that I have with the legislator should be and ask for funds, or should it be more of a relationship building meeting?
You get much further with relationship building. If you talk to them once a year in February, you're not going to have the effect that you want. I would recommend for your personal legislator, if they're having an open house, I would go to it. I would arrange meetings with the legislator in person. If he has a fundraiser and you can afford to go, some of them are $25, $50, I would go to that. A lot of what gets done on the Hill is done because of relationships. Lobbyists build relationships. And again, if you have a relationship, if they know your child with disability, you're going to get an open door to them and they will support you. So developing that relationship is a year-long process. It doesn't hurt to help them sign petitions or go door to door. The more you're involved with the legislator, the more they're going to be committed to you. And again, we cannot write a check for $100,000 for the campaign. We can't achieve the economic support that other parties can. So it really has to be in our relationships and our stories that make the legislators motivate the legislators to support our funding initiatives.
Okay. Is there anyone else that I should be contacting concerning the increase in funding requests for people with disabilities?
They talked about the process. Yeah, it is very important not only to get to the governor, but to get to the governor's staff. If you would ask the governor, what do you think you're going to do for funding for people with disability this year? I would not be surprised if he didn't know. Now, the governor does give direction to his deputy secretaries and secretaries in July, and says zero funding or cost of living, or I want to expand whatever funding they want to expand. So it's important to get it into the legislation or the budget before it gets to the legislators if you can. And frankly, I'm going to be in trouble for this. It doesn't hurt to call up the Secretary of OCDEL, Office of Early Learning and Child Development, or the Secretary of OVR, and say, I want to talk to the Secretary, and ask him and tell him, you know, you've been waiting for employment services for 2 years. When do you think you're going to be able to help my son find employment? Again, emails help and letters help, but the closer you are to the person, the more likely they're going to respond positively. So if you send a letter, it gets one level. If you send an email, it probably gets a little better. If you make a phone call and talk to the legislator, it's a little better. If you meet with the legislature staff, it's better. If you meet with the legislator, it's best. So, and I don't want to underplay their staff. A lot of legislators are looking for recommendations from their staff. They're counting contacts with their constituents. And I can tell you, staff have been extremely helpful for us in the past, because they keep on the forefront what we want in funding with the legislators. So they're a reminder. They talk to them every day. But again, in person, face-to-face with the legislator is the best. And I would recommend Zoom at this time, because COVID is real and we don't want you to get COVID. But this will not last forever. Face-to-face is the best.
Can you talk about what priorities the ARC has for funding in the upcoming year? What will you be working on?
Well, the ARC PA, I think, is going to be real clear on their primary funding issues, and they're twofold for the ARC PA. One is the waiting list, and we have hundreds of people who are in desperate need of residential care today, who have IDD, who don't have services. They also will be pushing special education funding. Special education funding is not fair in Pennsylvania. Frankly, wealthier school districts get more money than poorer school districts, which seems counterindicated, but it's how the funding is done. For the ARC Alliance, we have two major concerns of funding that we will be addressing. We will be supporting the ARC PA, but early intervention over the last 13 years, 1 year we got a 3% increase. You cannot function on your funding for 13 years with a 3% increase. I have decimated my administration of my early intervention program, and I'm having a difficult time recruiting because we pay far less for OTs and PTs and speech therapists and teachers than hospitals and school districts do. So we will be trying to push hard for that. That would be our first priority of funding. And our second priority is we do guardianship for people. And if you are under guardianship and you go into a nursing home, you usually run out of money pretty quickly. And if you have an income, the nursing home gets the income pretty much. In 1988, they set a rate of $100 a month to provide guardianship services to people who are in a nursing home who have income. 1988 and today is a long way apart, and the cost of living is gone up tremendously. It cost us $300 a day to serve someone, and we're getting paid $100 a day. which leads to extremely large deficits. And we think that the rate should be $300, which reflects the actual cost to provide guardianship services on average. So we're going to be pushing real hard for an early intervention rate increase and permitting us to bill out of the income of the person under guardianship more than $100. So that's going to be our two priorities.
I'm sure that there are some families who are hesitant to approach their legislators. They might be afraid of talking to someone in the legislature. And I'm sure that there are some situations that are more difficult and maybe don't go very well at the beginning. Do you have any stories or any recommendations about how to handle those situations, or maybe some experiences that you've had where a difficult situation has turned into something positive?
Yes. The most common objection that legislators will throw at you, and you need to be prepared for it, is where am I going to get the money? And I think the response to that is twofold. I think the first response, and you may be reluctant to say this, but what I tell legislators, if necessary, I will support a tax increase if the tax increase is going to go to people with intellectual developmental needs who are in need of services. So they don't get that very often, and nobody wants their taxes raised. And that I think gives them a safeguard, and it also keeps them from saying, where are we going to get the money? Once you tell them, I'll take a tax increase. Now they may say, and they will say, well, nobody else wants a tax increase, but say, we need to help these individuals. I do get the question occasionally, who do you want to cut? And at one point in my early years, I said, oh, I'll tell you. And the legislator said, no, I really don't want to hear it. I was just trying to get empathy for my position. But if they do say to you, where should I get the money? I would say, you know, it's above my pay grade. You are the legislator. There's an appropriations committee. We need to figure this out. But don't say, oh, and we say this a lot as family members. Oh, I understand the predicament you're in, and oh, don't fund it because I understand you don't have the money. And as I said earlier, if they want the money, they'll find out where to get the money from. It's a level of motivation. I only had one, and legislators are going to be kind to you because they want you to vote for them. And they're generally kind to you because, again, they don't want you telling your friends, boy, that guy was a real jerk. They want you to say, this guy's a good guy and he listened to me. So they're generally nice. But I did talk to one individual who was a libertarian conservative, and he said, I don't think we should take care of other people's children. They should take care of them themselves. And that presented a very difficult position to me because I wanted to be extremely critical to such a callous approach. And again, this legislator told me in the past, the only thing we should do, fund is roads, the military, and police, and ambulance services. Anything else should be the responsibility of the individual. Those are very rare people. But I would, if someone said something like that, I would say, so you don't feel any responsible for individuals through no fault of their own are in the need of support. You think we should not support them. They stammer a little bit. The person who said this stammered a little bit, but didn't say it again. And thank God in the next election period, the citizens decided there should be another representative. But generally, again, legislators are going to be supportive. One of the things I would ask when you're leaving, before you leave, is can I count on you for your support? Because they're never going to say to you, no, I'm not doing it. You don't understand. I really don't care. They'll listen. They'll nod their head. So it's good to say for the record, will you support the funding of an increase in early intervention funding? The question is direct. They'll probably say, I'll look into it, but they may say, you have my support. And if they say that, in all likelihood, they're going to be pushing for it. Because once they commit, and they're very good at not committing, once they commit, it usually means they are interested in seeing the increase in funding that you're requesting. And again, every legislator has some power in this. There are different levels of power. Appropriation chair is much more powerful than a freshman, but they all have the ability to talk to their leadership and say, this is a priority for me. And if they say, if you want my vote, you have to give something to my priority. And that's how the system works. I would not be afraid of a legislator. They're just like you and me. And again, and I've said this several times, they got into the legislature because they care and they want to make a better world. And if you can show them that what you want is good for their constituents, it is highly likely that you will get the support that we want for those individuals who need the support.
We hope you've enjoyed our program today. If you have any questions, or if you would like to help the ARC Alliance achieve its mission of full inclusion, or if we can be of any assistance to you or your family, please feel free to contact us at 484-868-0443, where you will reach our speaker today, CEO Paul Stengle. Thank you.